I am a robot.
I think that's as good an introduction as any other. Now, before you go getting excited, no, I'm not one of those cool, badass cyborgs you see in the movies, like Terminator and all that jazz. No cigar. As a matter of fact, if you were to see me from across the pond, you would have difficulty telling that I was even a robot to begin with. This is because my family and I are all humanoid robots. Ah, you transhumanists out there? And the only way you can tell we are robots is by the fact we have large Duracell batteries stuck in our backs. Not energizers. Fuck that rabbit. The reason? Well, in the very early 1990s, me and my family were constructed by Dr. Bunsen Honeydew in order to serve as the mascots for the Duracell company. Duracell sales were plummeting during the 1990s as a result of some pretty stiff competition with Energizer. Energizer are pricks, though, as they killed my good friend Montgomery Bean. Montgomery Bean worked at Energizer's offices up in Lost Heaven, and one day he was suffering a proper bad headache. He wanted some painkillers to kill that bastard of a headache, but Energizer were having none of that, I tell you. Energizer responded to Montgomery's complaints by dispatching their mascot, Pink Bunny Anna. They believed that Energizer batteries were what Montgomery truly desired. This proved to sadly not be the case once really ugly worms shot out from Montgomery's ears, killing him instantly. The worms were incredibly dangerous and rather looking things since they were being held captive inside the Energizer batteries. Following Monty's death, the worms were taken to Area 69. Don't mind if I do. In order to be thoroughly investigated by top men. Who? Top men. Oh, Monty, you can't buy me love. Sorry about that little song and dance number, my Ringo stars. In any case, needing something to combat against the pink booty mascot, which had in itself brought Energizer so much power, Duracell hired the marvelous Dr. Heinz of the Baked Bean Factory to construct my family and I. Dr. Heinz was a genius. Sorry, that's how I say magician. I'll say it the proper way now. Of creation, you could say. Dr. Heinz was responsible not only for creating us, but he was also responsible for creating Dr. Gareth Smellick, the smelliest Northwestern alumnus that Northwestern Medical School has ever yet known. Ever watch Van Wilder? Don't. Creating my family and I was no small feat. I have a foot fetish. Dr. Hines spent days and nights at the Baked Bean Factory working on us, and once he was finally completed, he was forced under threat of death to remove his name from the bottom of our shoes, and instead write the Duracell name there instead. Duracell forced Heinz to do this so that we would never discover who our true creator really was, and we would believe that Duracell were our Lord and Saviors. In a weird way, this kind of worked. Well, it was, of course, until I decided to read a few files. Just a few, though, nothing too major, so don't you worry your little head about it, Sonny Jim. With my family and I serving as their mascots, Duracell were finally able to establish themselves as the undisputed king of the batteries. Oh, and I think that is as good a time as any to tell you about my fams. Ahem, my wife's name is Flo. You thinking insurance, punk? I have a son named Zachary, or Zach for short, and a teenage daughter named Trish. More like Trish a fish, am I right? Ha ha, wink. I have to thank Heinz for building them, as I've got the whole package, if you know what I mean. Now, I love my family and I'd do anything for them. Well, some of them anyway. It's, less said about Grandma Putterman and Aunt Gert. Our surnames were Putterman, and Duracell had originally intended for us to be called the Duracell family. But after getting several threatening calls from Dr. Heinz's legal team, the company opted to change our names to Putterman. Sadly, all good things cannot last forever, as they say in Germany, as we only appeared in adverts for a couple of years, 1994 to 1996 to be exact. I know that such exactive details aren't typically needed for an account such as this, but I feel as though I would be stirring you a stir if I were to give you incorrect details about such important things as this. Now, Duracell, as it turns out, wanted us dead, as we, according to Trish, were having the opposite effects on Duracell's customers. Instead of enticing the customers to go to their local Morrison's and buy some Duracell batteries, we had the complete opposite effect, as our horrific half clay, half human faces would force customers to run for the hills. Well, not wanting to lose any more valued customers. Yeah, right. Duracell put out a hit on us and ordered their trusted assassin and Duracell addict Larry Sari to take us out. And I don't mean take us out as in take us out for fish and chips, if you know what I mean. Ha ha, isn't that a good one? I'll take a mental note to write that one down. Yeah, so Larry Sari works for Duracell as an assassin, and he's often tasked by the company to take out spies of the company who were sent by the rival Energizer. Larry was considered Duracell's most vital asset due to his tendency to stick batteries up his nose holes. Watch that blowfish blow. Anyway, my Fail and I were able to escape our own deaths by reminding Larry of how, when he was a young child, he used to eat noodles in the back room of the Golden Koi with Donald Duck. Of course, Donald Duck was not known by that name back then. It was instead referred to as Sammy. I must be honest, I'm not really sure how that story managed to convince Larry Sari not to kill us, but he agreed to not only fake our deaths, he went on to provide me and my family with first-class plane tickets to Empire Bay. Heading to Empire Bay, Flo and I scheduled a meeting with realty agent Richard Beck. We purchased a home in Greenfield from Beck. In our absence, Duracell managed to keep itself afloat by focusing on their toes. Larry Sari tried to trick the company into thinking he killed us by delivering them giant Duracell batteries wrapped in fish, indicating that we sleep with the fishes. However, Duracell saw through the act due to Larry Sari being a pretty damn terrible liar. Yeah, well, can you blame him? Must be from all the Duracell batteries he shoved up his nose. Duracell decided to not send out a crew like some kind of Salieri, but instead opted to only get revenge on Larry Sari by locking him up in the dungeon. Oh. To this day, Larry begs for water. Will anyone ever give it to him? I think not. Also, to add insult to injury, those foolish turkey basters at Duracell placed a huge jug of water just 6 inches away from Larry's cell. Try as he might, Larry will never quite be able to reach it. How sad. I really mean it. How sad. Sorry, I got a little something in my eye. Hang on a second. Robots can't cry. They can feel a deep sense of sadness, but they cannot cry. Well, maybe not the Terminator Sonny Jim, but we the Puttermans, we can cry. We cry like the whale, if you know what I mean, Moby Dick. One man's obsession. Life in Empire Bay took some getting used to, but over time we were eventually able to get used to it. Sadly, problems arose since Aunt Gert and Uncle Lehman moved there as well. The reason I didn't mention Lehman earlier is because he's actually very pleasant and sure does love a good pheasant. That's a small one, though. Aunt Gert was very annoying as she kept going on and 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 on about boring stories from her time in the Merchant Navy, which she never actually served in. Eventually managed to silence her once and for all by replacing her Duracell batteries with normal standard batteries. At a family reunion BBQ of sorts, Aunt Gert kept going on and on and on and on and on and on and on about the time she and Lehman first tried using Duracell batteries, and thankfully her story was cut short when she fell dead into a big bowl of spaghetti and mashed potatoes. Boy, what a team, I say. Flo knew that I was responsible, but I tried to act unknowingly by bussing myself with flipping some burgers. Flo yelled as she then asked, "Did you slap her one of those other batteries?" Me? I asked, dumbfounded, while pulling the slyest face you'd ever see, Sly Cooper. Eventually, everyone started laughing, including yours truly. Heck, even Lehman laughed at his dear wife's passing, and that same evening, he assisted me and Zach with dumping Gert's body at Brusky's scrapyard. I guess you could say we were proper scrapers. I think this is as good a time as any to mention that while in Empire Bay, I tried my best to get closer to my kids, Zach and Trish, but I was having no such luck on that front, I'm afraid. Trish hated me anyway, since I caused one of her boyfriends, who was a member of the Greasers, to prematurely die due to him having standard batteries embedded into his back. I was always saying, it's also worth mentioning that Trish was very busy during this time period due to her studying hard in order to get into Fordham University. So with Trish studying harder than ever and Flo being busy with handling our finances, I tried my best to get into my son Zach's good books. Zach was a very hard kid to be around, and it also didn't help that he sounded like Bart Simpson on crack. I tried my best to get Zach to engage with me by taking him out on a fishing trip. Sadly, this proved to be a rather rookie error, as I failed to realize that fishes often come with Duracell batteries lodged into their backs. And this meant that we were chasing this damn fast for 6 months. 6 months, I tell you what! Think of all the hockey cards I could have collected in that time. In any case, upon returning home, I noticed that Zach was very fond of video games, and he often tried his best to get me to play with him. But me being an old fart, despite only having been built like 2 years ago, knew nothing about playing video games. Then, of course, a question came to mind. What game should I get Zach? That's why I recalled the brand Spyro the Dragon, the game that just came out for the Sony PlayStation. Zach loved his damn PlayStation more than anything else, including his, I'll leave that to imagination. This annoyed me greatly as I'd wanted him to be in love with the Nintendo 64, which Trish and I had stolen one night behind the back alley of the Lone Star Bar in Sand Island. And they called it Sand Island because there was no sand. Isn't that a little ironic? Don't you think? Money wasn't very good at the moment, sadly, and so needing a copy, I decided to ask my good friend and coworker Dijon about it. Dijon was a proper smelly dog who once stole a GTA 3 bootleg from some angry gorilla over in Croydon. We can clean up his act. Dijon has since found work down in the Southport docks with me. You see, Dijon and I work on the docks and move crates for $10 a piece. Dijon, however, was very crafty, and on this particular day, he suggests that we steal one of the crates we were meant to be placing onto the freighter. Why would we do that? I inquired, to which Dijon responded with, "Oh, Murloc would be as pleased as Poppy would." For those of you wondering, Murloc is the head of the docks and ex-sorcerer. Through the means of several betrayals and manipulations, Murloc was able to take control of the docks through the use of an old friend of his in the courts, i.e. Dijon. Now, the reason behind Dijon wanting to steal the crates was certainly not of left field, as the crates were known to contain shipments of PS1 and N64 games from time to time. No Sega Saturn games, though, as they were just too valuable. Now, initially I wanted nothing to do with Dijon's crafty scheme, as I said, "Come now, Dijon, that really isn't a very good idea." However, that's when I ended up tripping on a conveniently placed spanner, and this caused me to drop the crate that I was holding onto the floor. The contents of the crate spilled out onto the floor of the dock, revealing it to contain loads of heroin and a copy of Spyro the Dragon. The fact that Murloc was drug trafficking, you know, that shit, trafficking, drug trafficking, that's the shit I'm thinking of, was sickening to me, as he claimed in the interviews that he had with BBC Radio 2 that he hated the idea of drugs, all the while he was dealing them himself. Big fat jerk off. Right now. Do it right now. Go for it. Do it. Let's do it. Sinner. With Dijon's help, we put the drugs back into the crate and placed it onto the freighter. "What about the game, Murloc?" Dijon asked, to which I responded with, "I highly doubt Mr. Murloc will even notice that it's missing." I laughed, but Dijon failed to see the humor in the joke, as I then proceeded to run him over with my car. "Is there a doctor in the dock, y'all?" Dijon asked as he fell to the floor in pain. I should also probably mention that the car he was driving didn't really belong to him. No, the car actually belonged to Aunt Gert, but with her gone, I elected myself the car's new owner. Arriving in Greenfield, I reached my house and parked the car in the garage. Zach, meanwhile, was playing volleyball on the front garden, and I asked if he would like to play a game with me. "And what's that, Dad?" Zach inquired as I pulled the game out from my ear and showed it off to him. "Spyro the Dragon. Wow. I heard about that from the kids at school. Can we play, Dad, or can we?" Zach asked, to which I responded with, "Well, yeah, that's why I got it for you, son, idiot." Well, the last part actually set on my breath as Zach and I made our way inside of the house in order to play this brand new game. This is as good a time as any to mention that since we are robots, we had all our game consoles genetically altered by Dr. Heinz. This meant that the PlayStation controllers were freaking massive and the buttons were the size of dinner plates. Due to our overly large hands, I had to be incredibly careful when placing the disc into the console. Once the console was switched on and the disc was inside, I sat myself down on the sofa next to Zach as we finally readied ourselves to enter the marvelous world of Spyro the Dragon. Yeah, so anyway, the game started off weirdly. For starters, Universal Studios logo, not shown. Now, instead it was replaced with the Dijon Industries logo. The logo featured Dijon dressed like a sultan and drinking from a cup of tea. It's worth mentioning that Dijon was pulling an incredibly smug face. Perhaps the smuggest face that I've ever seen. The opening scene then began to play, as you might expect from the title, and this wasn't very good either. Well, for starters, the Nork was shown putting the flag on the mountain as normal, and when Spyro came flying toward him, he ended up flying a tad off course. In fact, Spyro ended up flying straight past the Nork and flew straight into a nearby mountain. In the title screen, the weather was dark and cloudy, and the Nork from the mountain stood there in place of Spyro, who was still stuck inside the mountain. Well, nothing seemed to be too bad yet, right? No, you'll see come the World Cup final this afternoon. Ha ha ha. Sorry, that one always manages to crack me up. In any case, I clicked on New Game as the opening cutscene began to play. It wasn't right at all. I mean, where do I even start? I mean, first of all, Spyro was red instead of purple, which made me cough out some corkscrews. Nasty Mark was replaced with Shrek. Oh, the dragons were incredibly old looking. Super old looking. They were so blooming old that they had to have walkers with them. You may be wondering how I was able to tell things were off with the game since the story took place in 1998 when Spyro 1 had just come out. Well, to tell the truth, I'd seen Uncle Lehman play the game down on his condo in Kingston, Empire Bay. I was watching him play the game and it made me want to buy the game in the first place. Anyway, the cutscene had Shrek walking down a massive grassy field when he noticed that Spyro and his fellow dragons were playing b-ball. That's basketball for those of you who aren't hip on the lingo. Shrek ended up losing his cool, but not because the dragons were playing b-ball without inviting him. No, it was merely because Spyro and his fellow dragons were so bloody terrible at playing it. In fact, Shrek got so angry by the dragons and their terrible b-ball skills that he ended up yelling, "What are you doing in my swamp?" Yes, as it turns out, Shrek had actually made residence in the Artisans. While initially he and the dragons had managed to live together in peace, lately the dragons had begun pushing their luck by playing b-ball in Shrek's front yard as they were practicing for a big game up in Florida. Shrek had no problems with the dragons practicing their b-ball skills, but what he did have a problem with the fact, well, I said they were earlier, bloody terrible at the game. Not like Nasty, Shrek had no magic powers, and as such weren't able to turn all the dragons into crystal sculptures like Nasty was. To combat this issue, Shrek reached inside his ear and shrugged out a large, thick blob of earwax. It's worth mentioning that while doing so, Shrek pulled an incredibly spicy face as he looked to be in a great deal of pain, but he didn't have a screwdriver. He didn't get one either. After removing the earwax from his ear, Shrek said to one of Spyro's dragon homies, "Hey, donkey, catch!" He then proceeded to throw the earwax at said dragon, which caused him to die on the spot. In fact, all the dragons and the artisans end up dying from the horrid smell and sight of Shrek's earwax. I mean, have you ever seen anything as horrific as Shrek's earwax? Well, of course you haven't. I mean, how could it be otherwise? After the cutscene ended, I decided to explore the artisan's homeworld. It didn't feel very homely to me at all. It was just a barren wasteland with a few green hills. There was no sheep to speak of. There was no Sparks accompanying Spyro and the artisans. That was until I made my way inside of the old castle. Sparks was just chilling in the throne room of the castle playing Shrek 2 on Xbox. Well, was this game sponsored by DreamWorks or something? I've heard of EU, but where were the EUs? You get it? Because an EU is a whatever. Pretend I didn't say anything. Let's move on. Sparks could actually speak for some reason. I was made very angry when I realized that Spark was voiced by David Spade. Did you know that Chris Farley was originally supposed to voice Shrek? Look it up. You can even hear the voices he did for Shrek on YouTube. I want to clear something up right now. I cannot stand David Spade. Why? Is it because he sucked as Joe Dirt at cleaning my turtlets? Well, it's because Mr. Spade told my successful career right from under me. He took it away. No, actually, no, he didn't. No, the real reason why I hate David Spade is because one time at a press conference, I asked about possibly getting a role in his next feature time, but Mr. Spade refused to acknowledge me. He ordered security guards to take me outside and beat me to a bloody pulp. The David Spade Sparks was so annoying as he kept going on and on about how crazy it was that Spyro could breathe fire. "He breathes fire!" Sparks proclaimed happily at the very top of his lungs. What made me feel even more annoyed is that the game developers had clearly modeled Sparks' face to look exactly like his voice actor. Thankfully, Spyro, as it turns out, was just as annoyed as I was, as he ended up killing Sparks by hitting him with a fly swat. With Spark disposed of, Spyro ate his little dragonfly buddy in order to dispose of the evidence. Well, with there not being much left to do in the artisan's homeworld, I decided to do my first ever level, Toasty. You see, since all the dragons and the artisans were dead, I was no longer required to free any of the dragons. How delightfully creme de la creme. Toasty, it was actually incredibly scary. Well, this was mainly due to the fact that the dogs in his level were Rottweilers who wanted to rip Spyro's face off, to be precise. Oh, precisely. Without Sparks, Spyro kept dying very quickly as the Rottweilers would leap on top of him and rip him apart with their claws. Rottweilers didn't even look cute and cuddly, as they looked pissed, and their eyes were black and hairy like a big old bumblebee. I eventually managed to get past the Rottweilers and managed to catch the egg thief before confronting Toasty, who was now replaced with an actual piece of toasty to have some butter on. Toasty was incredibly aggressive during the fight as he was able to spit Rottweilers out from his mouth, but Spyro was only just narrowly able to avoid. In order to beat Toasty, Spyro was given a mission prompt which said, in order to beat Toasty, you'll need some supplies. I headed to another side of the fighting arena where I found a huge stick of butter. I knew what I had to do. Running back to Toasty, I managed to pin him to the ground, began applying the hot, sweet butter to him. Once the butter had been applied, Spyro picked Toasty up and began eating him. It was rather humorous, and I laughed at Toasty's screams for help, while Zack said in a rather disgusting tone of voice, "Dad, you're one sick fishmonger." With Toasty disposed, I decided to head on back to the artisan worlds, see if I could take the hot air balloon to Peacekeepers. The person manning the hot air balloon was none other than Captain Ahab himself. If you wish to use my hot air balloon, you must help me catch a legend of the sea who goes by the name of Moby. Moby Dick, a Moby Dick. Captain Ahab, who sounded suspiciously like Liam Gallagher, sang as Spyro then said in a rather arrogant tune, "Not today, old man." He then proceeded to spit fire at Ahab, who reacted by somehow flying into the sky. He flew all the way across the sea toward his boat, the Picard. Realizing that I wasn't quite ready to advance further yet, if ever, I decided to pay a visit to Town Square. However, Town Square appeared to be like an actual town square. There were loads of shops all around which were beckoning for Spyro to come inside and buy some PG tips or maybe even a crust of bread. I wasn't able to control Spyro during this level for whatever reason, and because of this, Spyro acted on his own accord and made his way inside of the local Tesco. Spyro made his way down the various aisles until he reached the contentment aisle. And contentment aisle. You know what that is. Not the incontinence aisle, but the contentment aisle. He was looking for a jar of onion sauce, according to his eyes. You can tell a lot by a person's eyes, says I. Spyro walked down the aisle for a few minutes until he eventually came across a big old jar of onion sauce. Spyro picked the jar up, but he was rather disgusted by its cover, which had a picture of Shrek on it. Shrek was pulling a face you'd make when you let one rip and you try to act, but sadly you just don't have the acting skills to pull it off, I'm afraid. Furious over the cover design, Spyro in a fit of rage lost all self-control and threw the jar of onion sauce onto the floor, breaking it a million tiny bite-sized pieces. Spyro was then forced under threat of death by the owners of the Tesco to sweep up. So for the remainder of the level, I was basically playing a Spyro sweeping simulator, and who says dragons cannot sweep up? After cleaning up the Tesco, I say when in reality, Spyro ended up toppling over all the aisles, which made a huge bloody mess, but thankfully Spyro was able to escape from the chaos unscathed. I then departed from Town Square and decided that it was time for a speedway. Zack left the room at that moment to get a glass of OJ, that means orange juice if you're not hip on the lingo, as he got far too bored. What an arrogant little somebody. Sunny Flight was really something to see. The levels start off normally. That's a rhyme. Enough with Spyro flying high above the crystal blue sea. Spyro was flying aimlessly for quite a while due to the fact that there were no collectibles in the level to speak of. Suddenly, as if by magic, in the dark blue ocean below, Spyro appeared the Picard in all its majesty. Captain Ahab stood at the very front of the ship carrying a large harpoon as he yelled, "Let your harpoons fly!" Spyro's joke from earlier had, as it turns out, greatly insulted Ahab, as he was known to be a very easily offended piece of biscuit paste, even back in 1998. That wasn't biscuit paste. Ahab threw harpoon after harpoon after harpoon after harpoon after harpoon after harpoon at Spyro, but he managed to avoid all of them. Spyro flew to the other side of the large mountain, was able to find some magical growth mushrooms. Spyro ingested the mushrooms one by one, eventually grew to become roughly the size of a barge. The giant Spyro headed back to the main area of the ocean where Captain Ahab looked terrified upon eyeing Spyro's new size. Aboard the ship! Ahab commanded at the top of his lungs, but it was far too late as Spyro leapt into the air and fell into the Bagad, causing it to capsize to the very bottom of the ocean. The Bagad didn't stay gone for long, however, as there were some springs at the bottom of the sandy ocean floor, which caused the ship to go flying into the sky. We'll meet again, Spyro! Ahab could be heard yelling at the top of his lungs as the Bagad disappeared out from Spyro's sight. With Captain Ahab out of commission, my next step was to finally leave the artisans and head onwards to Peacekeepers. Now, my adventure could really begin. Returned to the artisan's homeworld, I hitched a ride on Captain Ahab's old hot air balloon and landed in Peacekeepers. Peacekeepers was full of life compared to the artisans. It was actually portrayed as an old-timey western town. People milking cows in the street, aggressive salsa dancers led by the Cornish man who is out for Spyro because he doesn't have a mustache. There was also loads of these really creepy-looking sheep creatures which had cow udders, no joke, and they shot out freaking bolts of lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening. Spyro was feeling very reckless during his time in Peacekeepers and began challenging people around the town to a gun duel. No one had accepted until he arrived. Richard Costello, an old friend of mine, used to work as a maintenance officer over at Duracell's headquarters. I left the company in 1995 to find a life in the Old West, and I never knew what they meant until now. Upon seeing Spyro, Richard Costello drew 2 revolvers as he asked, "We're ready to go down to Punishment Town, Spyro." "Bring it on," Spyro said as he donned a gray cowboy hat and he even began smoking a candy cigarette. That means cigarette. I can't imagine the bloody thing tasted very good as poor Spyro's eyes began to water shortly after biting into it. Costello and Spyro both turned their backs on each other and walked 2 meters down the path. Turning around, Spyro shot out 2 bullets from his own revolver, which not only managed to blow Costello's sombrero right off from his head, but also caused him to fall into the floor and floor and fame, floor and fame, floor and fame, floor and fame, floor and fame. I'm a robot. I needed to jolt my battery. Not wanting to be embarrassed any further, Costello brushed himself off and got up from the floor as he proclaimed rather happily, I might add, "Ought to be off theme." And with that, Costello got on top of his Lloyd's Bank horse and rode off into the sunset while Spyro watched on and on. Well, I say on when in reality Spyro continually chased, tried to shoot Costello off the damn horse with his revolver. After concluding the gun duel with Richard Costello, I debated on which level to do next. Must admit, I was feeling like another boss battle, so Dr. Shemp was next on my list of levels to complete. The level was incredibly boring. It took place inside an actual doctor's office, and Spyro was shown to be attending therapy with Dr. Shemp, who was trying to discover why Spyro was so purple. Go a little deeper, Dr. Shemp instructed. "Well, the thing is, Doc, I'm just a lighter shade of purple, really," Spyro explained rather sheepishly. Dr. Shemp then decided that he and Spyro would play a little trust exercise. It was a trust exercise which involves someone falling backwards and then you catch them. Sounds simple, right? Well, sounding simple is the story of my entire life, buddy. Shemp's little trust exercise ended up failing miserably as Spyro became distracted by the rather weird-looking clock he had on the wall. It was just a bog standard wall clock, but Spyro, for whatever reason, seemed to be fascinated by it. Tick-tock goes the clock, but it really doesn't. Spyro remarked, while Dr. Shemp fell backwards and he ended up falling straight through the 10th-story window to his death below. He ended up splatting all over the pavement. Shemp's eyes were bulging out of his head as if in the utmost surprise, and this surprise was the only humanity remaining to that mad doctor. He was dead. After narrowly avoiding a run-in with the cops via an escape through the rooftop, Spyro took the portal back to Peacekeepers. Without me even pressing anything on the controller, he had made his way to the ice caverns. Ice Caverns was much more exciting than Dr. Shemp's level had been. For this level, Spyro was tasked by a gang of stereotypical Russian polar bears to rob some gas stamps from the Office of Price Administration. Once again, I must add, please don't tell Henry Tomasino. The Russian polar bears wanted the gas stamps in order to aid in their attempts to usurp Congress, who decided to construct a brand new mini mall on top of the foundation of the very ice caverns you see before you. Retrieving the gas stamp, Spyro then provided his assistance to the Russian polar bears in a game of cat and mouse against the tank which Congress had sent to eliminate the polar bear resistance. "We must make haste," one of the bears commanded in a thick, let's say Russian accent, as he and Spyro made their way on top of a nearby wooden shack. The bear reached under a small black carpet and revealed a large wooden suitcase. Opening up said suitcase, the bear revealed it to contain a grenade launcher. "I've always wanted to use one of these," Spyro remarked as he took the grenade launcher out from the bear's paws. Using the grenade launcher, Spyro was able to destroy the tank. Even the Russian bears made escape in race cars. With Spyro's help, the Russian polar bears raced their way down toward the local airport where they caught a plane to Beastmakers. They asked for Spyro to come and meet them there soon, when the time was right. When the time comes, will you be ready? I mean, shit. Night Flight took place on a huge freeway. Spyro was shown being chased down the freeway by the sheriff from Cars. Now, in retrospect, with current knowledge, I find to be very odd that Sheriff being in Spyro the Dragon a total of 9 years before the creation of Pixar's Cars. But whatever, just roll with the crock, you know? Spyro was chased down by the freeway, and Sheriff kept shooting bullets out from his ass, which caused Spyro to start slipping and sliding all over the freeway. Why is he shooting at him? Spyro asked himself. Spyro failed to realize that he was 1% over the speed limit, which had resulted in him unintentionally being put on Sheriff's death list. Sheriff has zero tolerance for speeders, mind you. He was known to be quite lenient back in the day, but these days he's become a miserable car to be around, perhaps as a result of his addiction to kerosene. Sheriff just can't get enough of the darn stuff. It drives me up the wall. Me and Sheriff briefly bunked together during my failing nice time at Duracell. We bunked together in an old boarding house on 48th Street, but one December night, Sheriff disappeared out of the blue. Now, I know what became of him thanks to this horrid game, but I wish I'd never found out. Anyway, Spyro was eventually caught in the shoelace and was brought to court by Sheriff. The court case lasted 2 seconds, and Spyro was able to get away due to there being a severe lack of evidence. In Magic Crafters, Spyro was forced under threat of death, mind you, to perform tricks in a traveling show. He knows that's not much, but it's the best that he can do. There were egg thieves in this level, and they seemed to be even faster than normal. Spyro just couldn't catch up with any of them for the life of him. I tried my best to get the damn egg thieves, but there was no such luck in that regard, I'm afraid. Realizing I'd never be able to get the damn egg back, I resorted to paying a visit to Blowhard, which was completely different to what was portrayed in the real game. Zack had been busy putting another Duracell battery into his back, came into the room at that moment, and asked if he could play on for a bit. "Be my guest," I said as I handed Zack the controller. Zack pressed the X button, which caused Spyro to roll around like a dog. "Roll over, roll over." "This is it," Zack cried as he ran out of the room screaming and crying like a little girl. What a big old silly windsill. Windsill, windmill, windowsill, windsill, windowmill, windsill, windowmill, windsill, windowmill, windsill, windsill, Mr. Winston smokes just like a ferret should. That means cigarette. Blowhard had Spyro in the middle of a massive snowstorm when he came across 2 former members of the Hobbs crew named Ishmael and Queequeg. Spyro attempted to walk past the pair, only to get grabbed in a headlock by Queequeg, who asked, "Want to help with the harvest?" "Not particularly," Spyro responded, but sadly Queequeg was not taking no for an answer. According to Ishmael, he and Queequeg needed to take some warm blankets and cans of soup to the people of Uptown Valley, who had somehow managed to waste their entire food supply for the winter. Talk about an uptown funk. Spyro, Ishmael, and Queequeg rode toward the valley on horseback. But that's when Spyro, feeling greedy, decided to take the food and blankets for himself. "Oh, you greedy bugger!" Ishmael yelled at the top of his lungs while Queequeg threw harpoons at Spyro. Imagine escape as the pair were forced to break news to the people of Uptown Valley. Perhaps instead of that, Queequeg could simply eat the people of Uptown Valley, as he was a cannibal after all. In any case, Spyro's joy of stealing the soup and blankets didn't last very long as he passed by the crystal blue ocean. Moby Dick came out from the ocean and grabbed Spyro's cans of soup right from under his wings. Spyro was so shocked by Moby Dick's sudden appearance that he ended up dropping all the warm blankets into the ocean. Moby Dick then began carrying the cans of soup under the sea, while the smelliest smog song you'd ever hear play in the background. Honestly, it's so smelly and smog that'll make you gag smog. Now, I would have vomited at that smog song, but as I am a robot, I'm of course incapable of vomiting from smog. Spyro, however, was unable to hold it all in, and he ended up vomiting all over the snowy snow. Whoa, that's a lot of snow. Don't tell Mo. Already overheard you. Ah, crap here. Leaving Blowhard, Spyro decided to pay a visit to High Caves, which is where he ran into the Russian bear family from earlier. The Russian bear family informed Spyro that their flight to Beastmakers was canceled due to there being wild geese on the runway. In reaction to this lynching of the geese, the Russian bears decided to hitch a ride to High Caves. Sounds legit, Spyro said as he began smoking a pipe. Also, at one line, Spyro didn't sound like Carlos Alaz Requi, but instead he sounded like Sir Patrick Stewart. Sounds legit. It was only for that line, but still managed to make me feel just a little bit uneasy. Ooh, I'm getting nervous. Now, the Russian bears want to regain their fortunes after the failed gas stamp heist started to kill Maurice of the Tetley Tea Folk. Maurice used to be an old friend of the Russian bears, but he decided to cut his ties with them in order to begin running for Congress. Old Maurice desperately wanted to become a member of Congress, which is what had led to the Russian bears wanting him dead. Spyro was taken to Maurice's hangout, which was located in High Caves, and Spyro learned that Maurice was being guarded by waves upon waves upon waves upon waves of Panthonitis. The Panthonitis often worked as hired security for Tetley Tea since 1985, to be exact, as a part of a brand deal the company made with High Caves. Realizing that he couldn't simply fight Maurice head on, Spyro climbed his way on top of an old oak tree and found a conveniently placed sniper rifle. Using said sniper rifle, Spyro aimed directly at Maurice's head, but quickly realized that he could no go through with the murder. After all, Spyro didn't even know who Maurice was. Could he really lower himself to kill an innocent man while a bunch of criminals roam free? I mean, well, I certainly could. But Spyro's, it seems, has a much larger moral code than I, so he opted to let Maurice live. This move ended up biting Spyro hard on the arsehole, as upon returning to the Russian bears, he found that their hideout was under attack from the held-back reserve of the Tetley Tea Folk. "Buy in the cannons!" Gaffer commanded as he began shooting machine gun rounds, which managed to wipe out half of the Russian bear fleet. Thinking quickly, Spyro distracted Sidney from the post by giving an incredibly smelly glass of iced tea. With Sidney retreating from the scene in order to use the bathroom, Spyro took command of Sidney's machine gun and began fighting back against Gaffer and his forces. Now, this was back in 1998, so Gaffer was a lot more ruthless back then, so he ordered his troops to advance further into High Caves. Despite Spyro's best efforts, the entire Russian bear fleet was wiped out, sadly. Of course, Spyro's most logical next move was to testify against the Tetley Tea Folk, but Gaffer had other ideas. Gaffer offered Spyro a lifetime supply of Tetley tea bags, just as long as he swept this entire Russian bear fiasco thing under the rug. Spyro agreed to Gaffer's offer, and from that point forward, Spyro became a loyal follower of the Tetley Tea brand. Heck, in 2003, there was a brief stint in time when you could get PS2 copies of Spyro Enter the Dragonfly stuck to the bottom of limited edition Tetley Tea boxes. Also, the boxes came with a horrifying-looking Spyro mask, which was made in an old abandoned McDonald's on Lost Heaven. The McDonald's was abandoned because the employee there used to force people to put the masks on in order to prove their assault. Spyro seemed to not regret causing the downfall of the Russian bears by allowing for Maurice to live, and instead busied himself by putting a Fat-Lemon cigarette into his mouth. Afterwards, Spyro got done smoking his Fat-Lemon cigarette. He decided that it was time to head onwards to Beastmakers. After arriving in Beastmakers, I was able to find some dragons who apparently hadn't been destroyed by Shrek's earwax, like the dragons and artisans. The dragons were far too busy knitting scarves to even bother noticing Spyro's appearance. Even if they did notice him, they made a poor job of showing it. I then decided it was finally time to conquer treetops, perhaps one of the most infamous levels in the Spyro the Dragon fandom. Could this bootleg game somehow manage to make this already infamous level even harder? Well, wait and see. Even back then, 1998, all around town, people would yap on and on about how horrible Henry of the level Treetops was. I didn't really believe that statement myself until now. Now, for starters, treetops looked very scary, as there were loads of really long tree vines hanging off from the side of the trees. The jumps that the game wanted Spyro to make in this level seemed to be incredibly unreasonable, at least from my point of view, that was. The supercharged rams were even more fast than usual, and this caused me to die on multiple occasions. At one point, the X button on my controller felt like it had been wedged into place, and this meant that Spyro was no longer able to jump, resulting in even more deaths. For one of his many falls, Spyro ended up getting tangled in a massive tree vine. Ooh, through the tree vines. Seeing no other way out, Spyro began cutting at the tree vines with his claws. Spyro! Don't! I cried at the top of my lungs. It was far too late as Spyro ended up falling through the trees at an alarming rate. He didn't die from the fall, however. No, instead, Spyro ended up crash landing inside of an old abandoned mine. The foreman at the mine, who looked like a fat, blooming mole, forced Spyro to start digging for diamonds. While digging through the diamonds, Spyro was able to find a portal back to Beastmaker's. Return to Beastmaker's, Spyro was pulling loads of tree vines off from his scales as he decided that his best bet would be to pay a visit to Misty Bog. I didn't last very long in Misty Bog, as well it was just a massive toilet. It was the world's biggest toilet, according to a local that Spyro talked to briefly. Wanting to get a better look? Fucking weirdo. Spyro got on the very top of the toilet and ended up falling in. The camera then panned down to the front entrance of the toilet, which showed Spyro walking out covered in shit, and he looked nasty. Oh, buggering Buggerton, Spyro muttered as he decided to see if there was a shower available in Beastmakers. What Spyro didn't realize is that showers are actually banned in Beastmakers as a result of tax returns or something. So that's a further buggering Buggerton to add to your list, Spyro. That is. Spyro, however, managed to clean himself off by jumping into a nearby lake. Nice going, Spyro. With treetops and Misty Bog failing miserably, I decided to take a stroll in New York City. And by that I mean fight Metalhead. Metalhead featured the return of Richard Costello, who had gone on to form his own punk rock band. He asked if Spyro would like to play with him. I'd be honored to, Spyro proclaimed happily as he began playing the drums with Costello's band. Somehow Costello made a mohawk magically appear on his head as he began singing Highway to Hell. He stuck his tongue out from his mouth. It was red and white and looked diseased. Costello didn't seem to care as he continued to sing with Spyro. After concluding their little musical number, Spyro and Richard Costello parted ways on good terms. They wouldn't write each other Christmas letters each year or anything like that, but at least we know now that the pair would not try and kill each other over their failed gun duel in Peacemakers. I don't know about you, but that helps me get to sleep at night. Next up was Wild Flight. In this level, Spyro got chased down by an African safari bunch of angry rhinoceroses, you see. Spyro only just barely managed to escape the rhinos as he found the return portal, which ended up taking him to Terrace Village. Terrace Village, not to be confused with Greenwich Village, took place inside a large terrace house and featured Spyro doing a crossword puzzle. No joke, that was the entire level, just Spyro doing a crossword puzzle. Some levels didn't even seem to work, like Dream Weavers and Haunted Towers were just a jumble of colors and inconsistent frame rates. This didn't annoy me much back then, but nowadays I consider Haunted Towers to be my favorite level in the game, so you better believe I'd be pissed off if that level didn't work now. Lofty Castle was very funny, as the castle was now ran by Lofty from Bob the Builder. So without Bob's constant care and control, Lofty had flown off the handle and became a very cynical sandwich. He forced Spyro to steal some cement from the local undertakers. When Spyro failed to do so, Lofty decided he was going to bury Spyro alive. Not wanting to be the next cask of Amontillado, Spyro was forced to attend a candlelit supper with Lofty. Now, thankfully, Spyro was able to leave the candlelit supper earlier by pretending to be sick with the flu. Lofty said, "Come back soon." "I might just do that," Spyro said. "Spyro, what the heck is wrong with you, bro? The damn crane wanted to bury you alive, and you'd still be happily taking him out for fish and chips should the occasion ever call for it. I don't understand things." Oh, well, never did understand things to begin with, so I guess not much was lost. I don't understand my life. I was very tired at this point, and I came to the conclusion it was time to end this damn bootleg game once and for all. And so my next and final step, mind you, was Shrek's Swamp, which is located in Dreamweavers. I somehow managed to stomach through the jumbles of colors and the bad frame rates until I came across the portal to Shrek's Swamp. Upon noticing that Spyro had entered his domain without an invitation, Shrek came out from his outhouse as he asked, "A donkey, what are you doing in my swamp?" Shrek then began charging towards Spyro, but Spyro was able to avoid getting eaten by challenging Shrek to a super karaoke dance-off. Okay, Shrek proclaimed happily as he made his stage appear magically. Spyro put a great deal of effort into his performance, but sadly failed to impress the rather cynical Judge Simon Cowell. Simon Cowell was so angered by Spyro's performance, he said, "You've got to be kidding me. The next winner of the Shrek Swamp Idol is me." Simon Cowell then leapt onto the stage and began singing a really bad Take That cover. He also began twerking towards Shrek, who rubbed his chin knowingly. Meanwhile, Spyro donned a pair of sunglasses as he remarked, "Time to set it off, Herb! Time to set it off!" How did Spyro know my name? He must have been checking me out or smoking a lot of herb. I knew that Spyro had a reputation for keeping some feelers in Empire Bay, but wasn't too sure of that until now. Oh, and with that, the closing credits began to play. Whew. Oh, only there was a small mid-credits scene which featured a young peanut named Jerry Beal watching a baseball game which had a horrifying Stan Smith bootleg playing a game. Now, Jerry was enjoying his time until two evil Chips Ahoy cookies came and sat next to him. They squished right into him, and Jerry then began singing a song with the cookies. "Smack down in the middle," Jerry and the cookies sang, to which the Stan bootleg responded by singing, "Squeezed in a fiddle." It sounded proper dumb, that Stan bootleg did, I tell ye. See, it must have been made me chuckle, but in retrospect, I found the video to be rather disgusting, as you could clearly see the pain in Jerry's face. He was struggling to breathe. He was that squashed. Those two cookies couldn't give two figs about Jerry's happiness. At one point in the video, a baseball hit Jerry right on his forehead. "Nice catch, Bonnie," one of the Chips Ahoy cookies proclaimed happily. Those gosh darn Chips Ahoy cookies. I certainly hope that someone stabs him in the eye with a 2x4. After the mid-credits scene ended, I responded by pressing the eject button on my PlayStation console. Phew, I needed some fresh air. I went outside for a brief afternoon mint when I heard something or someone rather rustling around in the living room. Returning to the living room, I was horrified to see Dijon had stuffed the game, so several priceless silverware into his trousers. "You dopey dog!" I yelled angrily, as Dijon responded with, "Murloc will be expecting this." He then proceeded to leap out of my living room window, and he ran all the way down the street laughing like a seal in heat. I'll leave you to imagine that one. Just kidding. Haha, I didn't leave you to imagine that one. I wanted to give chase to Dijon. I made my way out of the front door and got intercepted by Flo, who wanted my help in taking the groceries into the house. "Oh, Flo, but I really gotta go," I cried at the top of the lungs, to which Trish asked, "Why, Dad?" "Well, Trish, the thing is, you see," I was cut off as Flo asked, "Herb, did you buy Zach a bootleg Spyro 1 game?" "Me?" I asked, dumbfounded, whilst once again pulling the slyest face you'd ever see. After Zach and I got done telling Flo and Trish our story, the pair agreed to help me and Zach track down Dijon. "He must have gone back to the docks," Trish said as we all got into the car and drove toward the Southport docks. Arriving at the docks, I discovered that Murloc was still in his office. My Fail and I made our way inside of the office and confronted Dijon over his betrayal, who was pulling the same face from the Dijon Industries logo. "What do you think you're doing here?" Murloc inquired, to which I responded with, "You know why I came here, Murloc, you old dog? You gave me and Zach a bad bootleg, which made us feel very upset." Murloc's language became very colorful as he then got ready to turn us into mincemeat. "Ew, I prefer shredded wheat, personally. Preferably without milk." Before killing us, however, Murloc went on to explain the origin behind the bootleg. The bootleg was created by Duracell, and they paid Murloc to give the game to me. In reality, Dijon was in on the scheme, and this is why he convinced me to steal the game. He wanted me to get into big trouble with Murloc so that he would be given his very own bag of money. Duracell and Murloc hoped that the bad vibes from the bootleg would cause me and my dear family to combust into flames. Well, thankfully, this ended up not being the case, and so Murloc was then forced to try and kill us himself. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. But that's when Flo offered to make Murloc and Dijon a spot of tea. "A spot of tea, eh?" Murloc asked as he began rubbing his beard knowingly. People sure do love rubbing their chins and beards, don't they? Returning to our home in Greenfield, Flo popped the kettle on whilst I gave Murloc and Dijon a tour of the house. "What is that?" Murloc proclaimed to the very top of his lungs as he'd eyed upon one particular beautiful sight. On top of a cupboard in the living room sat an old oil lamp. Murloc then asked if he could have it, to which Zach asked, "Why? It's just a boring old lamp." Murloc responded to this question with, "Well, maybe to you, son, but not to me." Murloc then made a step ladder appear magically, and he climbed his way up the ladder until he was able to get a grip on the lamp. Upon grabbing said lamp, Murloc screamed for joy. Sadly, Murloc's joy was cut short as a helicopter came crashing through the walls of my house. Who should be driving the helicopter than none other than Launchpad McQuack? Scrooge McDuck was sitting in the passenger's seat, and he got out from the seat and ran toward the lamp. Using his walking stick, Scrooge was able to swipe it right out from under Murloc's hands. "After him!" Murloc barked as he and Dijon hopped onto an old moped, began giving chase to the helicopter as it crashed through the walls of our house and struggled to fly all the way toward the sunset. What a Bobby Jaguar," Trish remarked. What's up, Doc? I couldn't help but agree. As I stood there watching Launchpad and his helicopter ride toward the evening sky, I began to ponder if my life would ever truly be normal. If you're still here, then fuck, I think you've realized that I'm probably not capable. I mean, shit. Thankfully, Duracell were tricked into thinking that my family and I had died from the bootleg. Murloc decided to lie on our behalf as he really liked the way we played to the beat of our own drums. Not really sure what that means, but whatever. I think the Energizer Bunny does that shit. Life started getting better, and as years began to pass and the 2000s rolled around, I finally managed to get a better living for myself by getting a job as a bartender at the Maltese Falcon, a bar and restaurant located in Midtown, which is ran by Scarpa family Don Eddie Scarpa. And he's very nice to me. I always make sure I get paid $50,000 every hour on the hour. My family's lives began improving, too. There's no time to talk about them now, as my feather is almost out of ink, if you catch my drift. Catch like the baseball bat that Jerry caught in that famous mid-credit scene. Sorry, what those two Chips Ahoy cookies did to that poor peanut still annoys me even today. I've never wanted to eat Chips Ahoy so much in my entire life. Oh, as for Murloc on Dijon, last I heard they were running rackets down in the shipyards in New Hanover. Well, that's certainly a nice thought to have, I'm sure. Anyway, thanks. Have a lovely day or a lovely evening because I am out of here like Vladimir.